perfection is a pursuit that often drives men to the brink of madness. In the high-stakes world of currency, counterfeiting the difference between a master criminal and a federal prisoner is often measured in microns. One slip of the hand or one wrong mixture of ink can destroy months of meticulous labor and lead to a lifetime behind bars. But sometimes the error is not found in the complex chemistry of the paper or the microscopic details of the engraving technique. Sometimes the mistake is so simple and so glaring that it defies all logic. This is the story of a man who could replicate the intricate swirls of a government treasury note, but failed a basic spelling test. It is a tale of hubris and the tiny details that bring down empires. The year was 1966, and the nation of Australia was undergoing a massive transformation that touched the wallet of every single citizen. The country was saying goodbye to the British system of pounds, shillings, and pence, which had been used for generations. In its place came the new decimal currency system, featuring dollars and cents. It was a time of confusion and opportunity across the continent. Every cash register in the country had to be changed, and every citizen had to learn the value of the new colorful bills. For the vast majority of the population, this was a modernization effort. For the criminal underworld, it was the chance of a lifetime to strike, while the public was still adjusting to the new designs. Enter a man we shall call Arthur Vance, who was a printer by trade and an artist by nature. Arthur was a man who felt that the world had never quite appreciated his talents. He worked in a small print shop in the suburbs of Sydney, where he spent his days creating wedding invitations and business cards. But in the quiet hours of the night, Arthur dreamed of something much grander. He watched the news reports about the upcoming currency changeover with a growing sense of anticipation. He knew that for a few short months, the Australian public would be unfamiliar with the look and feel of the new $10 note. He saw a window of opportunity that would never open again. Arthur Vance was not a common criminal who would settle for crude photocopies or clumsy alterations. He considered himself a professional, and he approached the crime with the discipline of a master craftsman. He spent weeks studying the promotional materials released by the Reserve Bank of Australia. He analyzed the intricate geometric patterns and the specific shades of blue and black ink that were to be used on the new $10 bill. He knew that the key to a successful counterfeit was not just the visual appearance, but the texture of the paper. He sourced a high-quality cotton blend paper that felt remarkably similar to the genuine article when rubbed between the thumb and forefinger. The process of creating the plates was a labor of love that consumed Arthur for months. He worked in a makeshift darkroom he had constructed in his basement. He used a series of high-resolution photographs and hand-engraving tools to replicate the portrait of Francis Greenway, the colonial architect featured on the note. It was a poetic irony that Arthur did not fail to appreciate. Francis Greenway himself had been a convicted forger in England before being transported to Australia, where he found fame. Arthur felt a kinship with the historical figure on the bill. He believed that he too was creating a masterpiece that would be admired for its technical brilliance. The studio in the basement became a shrine to the $10 note. Arthur filled the room with sketches and test prints. He experimented with different chemical mixtures to age the paper and give it the crisp snap of fresh currency. He was obsessive about the watermarks and the metallic security thread, which was a new innovation at the time. He found a way to simulate the thread by weaving a thin strip of foil between two pressed layers of paper. It was a stroke of genius that would have fooled even an experienced bank teller. His work was nearing completion as the official launch date of the new currency approached in February of 1966. Arthur worked in total isolation. He knew that involving others would only increase the risk of betrayal. He was the artist, the printer, and the distributor, all rolled into one. His plan was simple and cautious. He would not flood the market with thousands of bills all at once. Instead, he would travel to different towns and cities across New South Wales and Victoria. He would use the fake notes to make small purchases in busy shops and pubs where the staff were rushed and unlikely to inspect the cash closely. He would buy a pack of cigarettes or a newspaper and receive genuine currency as change. It was a slow method, but it was safe. The day of the launch arrived, and the country was buzzing with excitement over the new money. Arthur waited a few weeks to let the initial novelty wear off. He wanted the public to be used to seeing the notes, but not yet expert in identifying them. When he finally printed his first batch of 100 notes, they looked magnificent. The blue ink was deep and rich. The geometric patterns were sharp and precise. The portrait of Francis Greenway looked back at him with a stern gaze. Arthur felt a surge of pride. He had done it. He had created money out of thin air. He packed a small suitcase and headed for the train station to begin his tour. His first stop was a bustling market town west of Sydney. Arthur walked into a general store with his heart pounding in his chest. He picked up a few items and placed them on the counter. He pulled one of his creations from his wallet and handed it to the shopkeeper. The old man behind the counter took the note and glanced at it. He did not hesitate. He rang up the sale and handed Arthur the change in genuine silver coins and smaller notes. Arthur walked out of the shop and into the sunlight. He had passed the test. The counterfeit was accepted as legal tender. He felt invincible. Over the next few weeks, Arthur traveled from town to town. He visited pubs in Newcastle and cafes in Wollongong. He bought groceries in small country towns and paid for train tickets with his manufactured wealth. He was careful never to hit the same place twice. He kept a meticulous log of his travels and his earnings. The money was piling up. He had successfully laundered thousands of dollars, which was a small fortune in 1966. He began to dream of retirement and a life of luxury. He thought about expanding his operation and perhaps hiring a runner to distribute the notes for him. But the life of a criminal is never without stress. Arthur began to feel the paranoia that comes with carrying a suitcase full of fake money. He started to see police officers in every shadow. He worried that a shopkeeper might have realized the deception after he left and given his description to the authorities. He decided to take a break and return to his home in Sydney to rest and plan his next move. He hid the remaining counterfeit notes and the printing plates under the floorboards of his basement. He told himself that he was safe and that no one could possibly trace the notes back to him. Meanwhile, the authorities were beginning to notice a problem. Banks in Sydney and Melbourne were reporting the appearance of high-quality counterfeit $10 notes. The Reserve Bank of Australia was alerted, and a special task force was formed to investigate the source. The detectives were impressed by the quality of the work. The paper was good and the printing was sharp. This was not the work of an amateur with a photocopier. This was the work of a skilled professional. They knew they were dealing with a dangerous individual who had the potential to undermine faith in the new currency system. The detectives analyzed the notes under microscopes. They looked for flaws in the engraving and irregularities in the ink. They compared the counterfeits to the genuine notes and identified several minor differences. The shading on the portrait was slightly too dark, and the spacing of the serial numbers was off by a fraction of a millimeter. But these were subtle defects that the average person would never notice. The police knew they needed a lucky break. They needed someone to spot a mistake that was visible to the naked eye. They alerted banks and businesses to be on the lookout for the specific serial numbers associated with the fakes. Back in his basement, Arthur decided it was time to print a second batch. He was running low on funds, and his greed was beginning to outweigh his caution. He set up the press and mixed the inks. He carefully aligned the plates and began the process. The rhythmic sound of the printing press was music to his ears. He watched as the sheets of paper were transformed into valuable currency. He felt the rush of power that comes with creating wealth. He did not know that he was about to make a fatal error that would go down in history. In his haste to produce the new batch, Arthur made a slight adjustment to the text plate. He had noticed that the lettering on the first batch was a little faint, so he decided to re-etch the words Commonwealth of Australia, which appeared at the top of the note. He worked late into the night, his eyes tired, and his hands shaking slightly from fatigue. He carved the letters into the metal plate in reverse, so they would print correctly on the paper. It was tedious work that required intense concentration. He finished the plate and went to bed without checking his work. The next morning, Arthur began printing. He ran off hundreds of sheets before stopping to inspect the quality. The notes looked perfect. The ink was bold and the text was crisp. He cut the sheets into individual bills and stacked them in neat piles. He was ready to flood the market once again. He did not notice the mistake. He was so focused on the quality of the print that he failed to read the words. He packed his bag and set out for the city. He was confident that this batch was even better than the first. Arthur chose a busy department store in downtown Sydney for his first target. It was a Saturday morning, and the store was packed with shoppers. He picked out a silk scarf and a pair of leather gloves. He approached the counter where a young woman was working. She looked tired and distracted. Arthur handed her a crisp new $10 note. She took it and placed it in the cash drawer. She handed him his change, and he walked away with a smile. It was too easy. He moved to the next department and bought a bottle of expensive perfume. He spent the entire day shopping. He bought clothes and electronics and fine wine. He was living the life of a wealthy man. By the end of the day, he had passed over 50 notes. He returned home with his arms full of shopping bags. He felt like a king. He celebrated with a glass of the wine he had purchased with his fake money. He toasted to his own genius. He did not know that the clock was ticking. He did not know that a sharp-eyed bank teller was about to ruin his life. The following Monday, a teller at a bank in the city was counting the cash deposit from the department store. She was flipping through a stack of $10 notes when something caught her eye. She stopped and pulled one of the notes from the pile. She looked at the text at the top of the bill. She frowned and looked closer. She grabbed a magnifying glass and peered at the words. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She called her manager over and pointed to the note. The manager looked and then looked again. He let out a gasp. The word Australia was spelled wrong. In his exhaustion and haste, Arthur had omitted the letter R. The note read Commonwealth of Austalia. It was a mistake so obvious that it seemed impossible. How could a man with the skill to forge a complex bank note fail to spell the name of his own country correctly? The manager immediately called the police. The detectives arrived and examined the note. They could not believe their luck. This was the break they had been waiting for. They knew that there must be more notes with the same error. The police issued a nationwide alert. They did not release the details to the press because they did not want to tip off the counterfeiter. Instead, they quietly informed bank managers and business owners to check the spelling on all $10 notes. They focused their attention on the areas where the notes had surfaced. They created a map of the locations and realized that the counterfeiter was operating in the Sydney metropolitan area. They set up a surveillance operation in the shopping districts where the notes had been passed. Arthur was unaware of the storm that was gathering. He was planning his next outing. He still had hundreds of the flawed notes in his possession. He did not look at them closely. To him, they were just paper representations of value. He decided to hit a series of liquor stores in the eastern suburbs. He wanted to stock up on expensive spirits. He drove his car to a quiet street and parked. He walked into the first store and placed a bottle of scotch on the counter. He handed the clerk the money. The clerk was a young man who had been warned by his boss just that morning to watch out for the fake notes. He took the bill and held it up to the light. He looked at the watermark and then he looked at the text. He saw the missing letter. His heart skipped a beat. He looked up at Arthur and tried to remain calm. He told Arthur that he needed to get change from the back room. Arthur nodded and waited. The clerk went into the office and called the police. He whispered into the phone that the man was in the store right now. Arthur waited for a minute and then began to feel uneasy. The clerk was taking too long. His instincts told him to run. He turned and walked out of the store, leaving the bottle of scotch on the counter. He got into his car and drove away. He did not know that the clerk had written down his license plate number. The police arrived minutes later. They took the description of the car and the man. They ran the plate number and found the address of the registered owner. It was a house in the suburbs, the house of Arthur Vance. The police wasted no time. They assembled a team and raided the house that very evening. Arthur was sitting in his living room watching television when the front door was kicked in. He did not try to resist. He knew the game was up. The detectives searched the house and found the printing press in the basement. They found the plates and the inks and the paper. And they found the stack of notes with the misspelled country name. The evidence was overwhelming. Arthur was handcuffed and led away. During the interrogation, Arthur was surprisingly cooperative. He seemed relieved that the charade was over. When the detectives showed him the note and pointed out the spelling error, Arthur stared at it in silence. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. He started to laugh. It was a dry, bitter laugh. He told the detectives that he had checked every detail 1,000 times. He had measured the lines and the angles. He had matched the colors perfectly, but he had never bothered to check the spelling. He called himself a fool. The trial of Arthur Vance was a sensation. The press had a field day with the story of the counterfeiter who could not spell Australia. The headlines were merciless. They called him the illiterate forger and the artist who failed English. The public found the story hilarious. It became a running joke in pubs across the country. People would check their change and joke that they were looking for the missing letter. But for the Reserve Bank, it was no laughing matter. They had to recall thousands of notes and reassure the public that the currency was secure. Arthur was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy term in prison. The judge remarked on the tragedy of a man with such obvious talent wasting it on criminal enterprise. Arthur served his time quietly. He worked in the prison library and taught art classes to other inmates. He never printed another note. The shame of his mistake haunted him. He had wanted to be remembered as a master criminal, but instead, he was remembered as the punchline to a joke. His legacy was one of irony. The case of the misspelled note changed the way Australian currency was designed. The Reserve Bank introduced new security measures and stricter quality controls. They added microprinting and more complex background patterns. They made it harder for anyone to replicate the notes with such simple equipment. The $10 note featuring Francis Greenway was eventually replaced, but the story of the forgery lived on. It became a cautionary tale for criminals and a favorite anecdote for historians. Today, the notes created by Arthur Vance are collector's items. They are worth far more than their face value. Numismatists hunt for the rare bills that bear the misspelling. They are prized for their rarity and for the story they tell. It is a strange twist of fate that the counterfeit notes are now more valuable than the real money they were trying to imitate. The mistake that sent Arthur to prison has made his work immortal in a way he never intended. The story serves as a reminder that even the most well-planned schemes can be undone by the smallest oversight. It speaks to the human element in every crime. No matter how advanced the technology or how skilled the perpetrator, there is always room for error. We are fallible creatures, and our mistakes often reveal more about us than our successes. Arthur Vance was a man who sought perfection, but tripped over the alphabet. As we look back on this historical puzzle, we are left with a lingering question. What drives a man to such lengths of deception, only to fail at the final hurdle? Was it simple exhaustion, or was it a subconscious desire to be caught? Perhaps deep down Arthur knew that he could not get away with it forever. Or perhaps it was just the universe playing a trick on a man who tried to cheat the system. Whatever the reason, the misspelled note remains a fascinating artifact of Australian history. The legacy of the crime is not just in the history books, but in the pockets of every Australian. Every time a new banknote is released, people look a little closer. They check the spelling and the details. They remember the story of the man who forgot the letter R. It is a small detail, but it is part of the national folklore. It is a story that proves that truth is often stranger than fiction, and that sometimes the smartest criminals are the ones who make the dumbest mistakes. So the next time you hold a banknote in your hand, take a moment to really look at it. Look at the intricate lines and the tiny text. Think about the skill and the technology that went into creating it. And remember Arthur Vance, the artist who almost got away with it. Remember that the difference between a fortune and a prison sentence can be as simple as a single letter. It is a lesson that history has taught us time and time again. In the end, the story of the counterfeiter who misspelled Australia is more than just a true crime tale. It is a human tragedy wrapped in a comedy of errors. It is a snapshot of a specific time and place when a nation was changing, and a man tried to change his fortune with it. It is a mystery that has been solved, but never fully forgotten. And it stands as a permanent testament to the fact that perfection is an illusion, and that we are all capable of missing the obvious.